My name is Alina, and I am 43 years old. I never thought I would be sharing this story publicly, but after everything I've been through, I believe it's time. Maybe someone out there needs to hear this. Maybe someone is going through something similar and needs to know that there is light at the end of the tunnel, even when that tunnel feels impossibly dark and endless. This is a story about loss, cruelty, survival, and ultimately, a twist of fate that I never could have predicted. It's about the woman who made my childhood a living nightmare, and how, decades later, life brought us face to face again in the most unexpected way. Some people believe in karma. Some people believe that what goes around comes around. I wasn't sure what I believed for most of my life, but now I think the universe has a way of balancing things out, even if it takes years, sometimes decades, to do so. So sit back, get comfortable, and let me tell you about my stepmother, the basement, my mother's stolen memories, and the day I became the one person my stepmother never wanted to depend on. Chapter 1. Before the storm. To understand where my story goes, you need to understand where it began. I was born in a small town in Michigan to two people who loved each other more than anything in the world. My mother, Patricia, was the kindest soul you could ever meet. She had this way of making everyone around her feel special. Her laugh could fill an entire room, and her hugs felt like coming home after a long journey. My father, Richard, was a hardworking man. He worked at the local manufacturing plant for over 20 years. He wasn't the most expressive person, but when he looked at my mother, his eyes said everything his words couldn't. I was their only child, their miracle baby, as my mother used to call me. She had struggled with fertility issues for years before I came along, and when I finally arrived, she treated me like the greatest gift she had ever received. Our house wasn't big or fancy. It was a modest 3-bedroom home with a small backyard where my mother grew tomatoes and sunflowers, but it was filled with love, laughter, and warmth. Every corner held a memory. My mother had decorated it with care over the years. Family photos on every wall, handmade quilts she had sewn herself. Antique furniture pieces that had been passed down through her family for generations. Her most treasured possessions were kept in a beautiful wooden chest in her bedroom. Inside were her mother's jewelry, old letters from my father when they were dating, my baby photos, and a collection of items that told the story of her life. She used to let me look through it sometimes, telling me the story behind each item. "One day, all of this will be yours, Alina," she would say, running her fingers over the delicate lace of her mother's handkerchief. "And you'll pass it on to your children, and they'll pass it on to theirs. That's how we keep the people we love alive, even after they're gone." I was 11 years old when my mother got sick. Ovarian cancer. The doctors said they caught it late, too late. She fought hard for 8 months, but in the end, the disease was stronger. I remember the day she died like it was yesterday. I was holding her hand in the hospital room. She was so thin, so pale, barely a shadow of the vibrant woman who used to dance with me in the kitchen while making dinner. But her eyes still held that same love, that same warmth. "Promise me something, baby girl," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Anything, Mama," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Promise me you'll always remember how much I love you. No matter what happens, no matter how hard life gets, you carry that love with you. It's yours forever. Nobody can take it away from you," I promised, and then, just like that, she was gone. Chapter 2. The woman who changed everything. The first year after my mother's death was a blur of grief and confusion. My father shut down emotionally. He went to work, came home, ate dinner in silence, and went to bed. I tried to reach him, but he had retreated somewhere deep inside himself where I couldn't follow. I was 12 years old, motherless, and essentially fatherless too, even though he was still physically there. I clung to my mother's belongings like lifelines. I would sneak into her closet and bury my face in her clothes, trying to catch the fading scent of her perfume. I would sleep with her pillow at night. I would sit by her wooden chest, holding her jewelry, reading her old letters, feeling close to her even though she was gone. The house became a museum of her memory, and I was its sole devoted visitor. Then, about 18 months after my mother passed away, my father came home one day with a woman. Her name was Deborah. She was everything my mother wasn't. While my mother was soft and nurturing, Deborah was sharp and cold. My mother had warm brown eyes that crinkled when she smiled. Deborah had ice blue eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. My mother dressed in comfortable clothes and rarely wore makeup. Deborah was always perfectly put together, with red lipstick and perfectly manicured nails. I didn't like her from the moment I met her. Something about her felt wrong, like a wrong note in a beautiful song, but my father seemed captivated by her. For the first time since my mother's death, I saw him smile again. He started talking more, engaging more. He seemed to be coming back to life. I wanted to hate Deborah for it, but part of me was just grateful to have my father back, even if it meant sharing him with this stranger. They dated for 6 months before he proposed. The wedding was small, just a courthouse ceremony with a few witnesses. I wasn't asked to be part of it. I sat in the back row, wearing a black dress because I was still in mourning, feeling like I was watching a betrayal unfold before my eyes. When Deborah moved into our house, my mother's house, everything changed. Chapter 3, the erasure. It started slowly, like a thief stealing treasures one by one, so gradually that you don't notice until everything is gone. First, it was the photographs. Deborah said it was morbid to have pictures of a dead woman all over the house. Richard needs to move on, she told me when I protested. We all do. It's not healthy to live in the past. My father nodded silently, too weak or too tired to fight. One by one, the framed photos of my mother disappeared from the walls, from the mantelpiece, from the side tables. They were replaced with pictures of Deborah and my father, Deborah alone, Deborah with her friends. I rescued as many photos as I could, hiding them in my room, but I couldn't save them all. Then came the furniture. My mother's antique pieces, the oak rocking chair that had belonged to her grandmother, the beautiful vanity where she used to brush her hair every morning. The dining table, where we had shared hundreds of family meals, were donated to charity. Too old-fashioned, Deborah declared. We need something more modern. I begged my father to stop her. I pleaded, I cried, I screamed, but he just shook his head, looking exhausted and defeated. She's my wife now, Alina. This is her home too. We have to compromise. But it wasn't a compromise. It was an erasure, a systematic elimination of every trace of my mother's existence. The final blow came on a Saturday afternoon, 3 months after Deborah moved in. I came home from a friend's house to find my mother's wooden chest, the chest that held all her most precious belongings, sitting by the curb with the trash. I ran to it, my heart pounding, and threw it open. It was empty, empty. Everything inside, the jewelry, the letters, the photos, the heirlooms that had been in my mother's family for generations, was gone. I screamed. I screamed so loud that the neighbors came out to see what was happening. I ran into the house, tears blinding me, and found Deborah in the living room, calmly reading a magazine. Where is it? I demanded. Where are my mother's things? She looked up at me with those cold blue eyes and smiled, actually smiled. They're gone, she said simply. I threw them away. All of it was just junk, taking up space. You need to let go, Alina. Your mother is dead. The sooner you accept that, the better. Something inside me broke in that moment. I lunged at her, screaming, crying, trying to hurt her the way she had hurt me. My father ran in and pulled me off her, holding me back as I thrashed and screamed. She threw away Mama's things, I sobbed, all of them. Everything. My father looked at Deborah, then at me, and in his eyes I saw something that destroyed me even more than the loss of my mother's belongings. Resignation. Acceptance. He wasn't going to do anything about it. Alina, he said quietly, you need to calm down. What's done is done. We'll talk about this later. But we never did. Chapter 4, the basement. After that day, things escalated rapidly. Deborah saw me as the enemy, and she made sure I knew it. Every interaction was laced with cruelty, every word designed to wound. You're just like your mother, she would sneer, making it sound like an insult. Weak, pathetic, no wonder she couldn't fight off a little cancer. I learned to stay out of her way. I spent most of my time in my room or at the library. avoiding home as much as possible. But some interactions were unavoidable. About a year after she threw away my mother's things, Deborah decided that my bedroom was needed for something else. A home office, she claimed. I was moved to the basement. The basement. Cold, dark, damp, with only a small window near the ceiling that let in a sliver of light. There was an old mattress on the floor, a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling, and nothing else. "This is temporary," my father said, not meeting my eyes, "just until we figure out something else." It wasn't temporary. I lived in that basement for the next 4 years, until I turned 18 and could finally escape. But the worst part wasn't the basement itself. It was what Deborah did to me there. Whenever she was angry, which was often, she would lock me in. There was a heavy door at the top of the basement stairs with a bolt on the outside, and she would slide it shut, trapping me in the dark. Sometimes it was for hours. Sometimes it was for entire weekends. The longest stretch was 5 days during a summer when my father went on a business trip. 5 days with nothing but a few bottles of water and some stale crackers that she slid under the door. I would sit in the darkness, shivering, hungry, terrified. I would talk to my mother, even though I knew she couldn't hear me. I would close my eyes and imagine her arms around me, imagine her voice telling me that everything would be okay. "You're strong, baby girl," I would hear her say in my mind. "You can survive this, you will survive this, and one day you'll be free." My father had to have known what was happening. He had to have seen the bolt on the door, noticed my absences, heard my cries for help. But he never said anything, never did anything. He had chosen Deborah, and that choice meant abandoning me. I stopped seeing him as my father during those years. He became just another part of the nightmare, a silent accomplice to my stepmother's cruelty. Chapter 5. Escape. The day I turned 18, I packed a small bag with the few possessions I had managed to keep hidden. Some photos of my mother, a letter she had written me before she died, a small gold locket that had been hers, and I walked out of that house. I didn't say goodbye to my father. I didn't acknowledge Deborah. I just walked out the front door and never looked back. I had saved a little bit of money from odd jobs over the years. Babysitting, lawn mowing, anything I could do to earn a few dollars. It wasn't much, maybe a couple $100, but it was enough to buy a bus ticket to Detroit. I had no plan, no connections, nothing but a desperate determination to build a life that was mine. A life where I would never again be powerless, never again be at someone else's mercy. Those first few years on my own were brutal. I worked multiple jobs, waitressing during the day, cleaning offices at night. I slept in homeless shelters, on park benches, in 24-hour laundromats when it was too cold outside. There were days when I didn't know where my next meal was coming from, but I never gave up. Every time I wanted to quit, I would think of my mother. I would remember her promise that I carried her love with me, that nobody could take it away. I would remember the girl in the basement who had survived 5 days in the dark with nothing but hope. If I could survive that, I could survive anything. Slowly, painfully, I started to build a life. I got my GED, then enrolled in community college. I studied business, graduating at the top of my class. I got a job at a small real estate company, starting as a receptionist and working my way up. I discovered I had a talent for the work. I was good at reading people, at understanding what they wanted and needed. And I was fearless. Years of surviving Deborah had taught me that there was nothing in the business world that could scare me. By the time I was 30, I had my real estate license and was making a comfortable living. By 35, I had started my own property management company. By 40, I owned a portfolio of rental properties worth several $1,000,000. I had done it. I had built the life I had promised myself in that dark basement. I had money, success, respect. I had a beautiful apartment, a thriving business, and a future that was entirely my own. But I hadn't forgotten. I would never forget. Chapter 6. The letter I hadn't spoken to my father or Deborah in over 20 years. As far as I was concerned, they were dead to me, just as surely as my mother was dead to them. I heard through distant relatives that my father had passed away when I was in my mid-30s, a heart attack, sudden and unexpected. I didn't go to the funeral. I didn't send flowers. I didn't shed a single tear. He had made his choice all those years ago, and I had made mine. I didn't know what had happened to Deborah after that, and I didn't care. I assumed she had taken whatever money my father had left, moved on to her next victim, and continued living her miserable existence somewhere far away from me. I was wrong. One day, about a year ago, I was going through the files for a new property acquisition. It was an apartment building in a neighborhood that was being revitalized, a solid investment with good potential for appreciation. As part of the due diligence, I was reviewing the current tenant list, checking for any potential issues with rent payments or lease violations. And there it was, a name that made my blood run cold. Deborah Mitchell. She had taken back her maiden name after my father died, but I knew it was her. The date of birth matched. The previous addresses matched. And when I pulled up her application photo, there was no doubt. It was older, more worn, with wrinkles and age spots that hadn't been there before. But those eyes, those cold, calculating blue eyes, were unmistakable. My stepmother was living in a building that I was about to own. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. It felt like the universe was playing some kind of cosmic joke on me. After 25 years of putting that woman behind me, of building a life that had nothing to do with her, she had somehow ended up right in my path. Then slowly, a different feeling began to emerge. Not fear, not even anger, but something else. Something that felt almost like destiny. My mother used to say that everything happens for a reason. I never knew if I believed that, but in that moment, sitting in my office, looking at my stepmother's face on my computer screen, I couldn't help but wonder. Had the universe brought us back together for a reason? Was this my chance to finally close that chapter of my life? Chapter 7, the decision. I thought about it for weeks. Part of me wanted to forget I had ever seen her name, to let someone else handle the property management and never think about Deborah Mitchell again. I had built a good life, a happy life. Did I really want to reopen those old wounds? But another part of me, a louder, more insistent part, couldn't let it go. I started researching her. What had happened to her in the years since I left? Had she moved on, found another victim, or had life finally caught up with her? What I found surprised me. After my father died, Deborah had inherited the house and everything in it, the house that my mother had loved, that my mother had decorated and cared for. But she hadn't kept it for long. Within a few years, she had remortgaged it multiple times, eventually losing it to foreclosure. The money my father had saved over decades of hard work, gone. Spent on extravagant vacations, expensive clothes, and bad investments. The men she had tried to charm after my father died had seen through her eventually, leaving her alone and increasingly desperate. Now, at 70 years old, she was living in a modest apartment on a fixed income, barely making ends meet. She was alone, unloved, and forgotten, exactly the fate she had tried to inflict on my mother's memory all those years ago. Part of me felt satisfied by this. Justice, delayed but delivered. She was reaping what she had sown, but another part of me, a small, dark part that I wasn't proud of, wanted more. She had taken everything from me. My mother's belongings, my childhood, my safety, my father. She had locked me in a basement for days at a time. She had looked at me with those cold eyes and told me my mother was nothing but junk to be thrown away. And she had never faced any consequences. She had never apologized. She had never acknowledged the damage she had done. The deal closed on the apartment building. I was now Deborah's landlord, and I had a decision to make. Chapter 8. The rent increase in the property management business. Rent increases are normal. They happen every year, usually small adjustments to keep up with inflation and market rates. Tenants expect them, and most don't complain too much as long as the increases are reasonable. But when I sat down to review Deborah's lease, I noticed something interesting. Her rent hadn't been increased in over 5 years. The previous owner had been lazy, negligent, a problem that had contributed to the building's declining state and made it an attractive acquisition for me. Deborah was paying $600 a month for a one-bedroom apartment. Market rate for similar units in the area, especially after the revitalization that was transforming the neighborhood, was closer to $2,400. I had every legal right to bring her rent in line with market rate. There was nothing stopping me. I picked up my pen and authorized the rent increase. 4 times her current rate, effective at the end of her current lease period. Standard 60-day notice, just like every other tenant who was paying below market rent. It wasn't personal. It wasn't revenge, it was just business. At least, that's what I told myself. Chapter 9, the confrontation. I knew she would come. I knew she wouldn't be able to pay the increased rent on her fixed income, and I knew she would fight it. So I made sure I was at the property management office the day the rent increase notices went out. I didn't have to wait long. 3 days after the notices were sent, my assistant buzzed me. "There's a Deborah Mitchell here to see you," she said. "She's very upset about a rent increase." "Send her in," I said. The door opened and there she was. Older, smaller, diminished in a way that should have made me feel pity but didn't. She walked in with a piece of paper clutched in her hand. The rent increase notice. Her face twisted with anger. "This is outrageous," she began, not even looking at me properly. "You can't do this. I've been a good tenant for years and now you want to quadruple my rent. This is..." She stopped mid-sentence. Finally, she had looked up. Finally, she had seen my face. The color drained from her cheeks. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. For once in her life, Deborah was speechless. "Hello, Deborah," I said calmly. "It's been a long time." She staggered backward, grabbing the doorframe for support. "Alina," she whispered. "How? How is this possible?" I leaned back in my chair, enjoying this moment more than I probably should have. "Please, sit down. We have a lot to talk about." She sat, her body moving mechanically, her eyes never leaving my face. She looked like she had seen a ghost, and in a way, maybe she had. The ghost of the girl she had tried to destroy, risen from the ashes to face her. "I don't understand," she said finally. You own this building." "I own this building," I confirmed. "I own several buildings, actually. I've done quite well for myself. No thanks to you, of course." She flinched at that, and I felt a flash of dark satisfaction. "The rent increase," she said, grasping for something she could understand. "You can't do this. I can't afford it. I'll have to leave." "Yes," I said simply. "You probably will. But where will I go? I have no one. No family, no friends. I'm an old woman living on Social Security. You would throw me out onto the street." I looked at her, this woman who had thrown away my mother's precious memories without a second thought, who had locked a child in a basement for days, who had made my life a living hell for 4 years, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not revenge, not even anger, just a vast, empty nothing. "You threw my mother's belongings into the trash," I said quietly. "You locked me in a basement for days at a time. You told me my mother was worthless, that her memory was junk to be discarded. And you never, not once, showed an ounce of remorse." Deborah opened her mouth, probably to make excuses, but I held up my hand to stop her. "I spent years hating you," I continued. "I spent years imagining this moment, the moment when I would have power over you the way you once had power over me. I thought it would feel bigger somehow. More satisfying." I paused, looking at the broken woman in front of me. "But it doesn't. Looking at you now, I don't feel satisfaction. I don't feel vindicated. I just feel sad. Sad for the child I was. Sad for my mother, whose memory you tried to erase. And yes, even a little sad for you, a lonely old woman who will die unloved because of the cruelty you chose to inflict on others." Chapter 10. The choice. Deborah started to cry. Big, heaving sobs that shook her frail body. "I'm sorry," she gasped between sobs. "I'm so sorry, Alina. I was horrible to you, I know that. I was jealous of your mother, jealous of the love your father still had for her memory. I wanted to erase her because I could never compete with a ghost." I listened without responding. I had waited 25 years to hear those words, and now that I was hearing them, they felt hollow. Too little, too late. "Please," she begged. "Please don't do this. I know I don't deserve your mercy, but I'm asking for it anyway. I have nowhere to go. I'll die on the streets." I sat there in silence for a long moment, weighing my options. I could enforce the rent increase and watch her struggle. I could evict her when she couldn't pay and wash my hands of her forever. It would be nothing less than what she deserved. But what would it make me? My mother's voice echoed in my mind, as it had so many times over the years. You carry my love with you, baby girl. Nobody can take it away from you. My mother wouldn't have wanted this. My mother, who was kind to everyone, who believed in second chances, who found good even in the most difficult people. She wouldn't have wanted me to become the kind of person who leaves an old woman homeless out of spite. But my mother also wasn't the one who had suffered in that basement. She wasn't the one who had lost everything. I was. I made my decision. The rent increase stands, I said finally. That is business, but I'm not going to evict you immediately. You have 6 months to find alternative housing. I'll provide you with a list of low-income senior housing options in the area. Whether you use it is up to you. Deborah looked up, a flicker of hope in her tear-stained eyes. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you, Alina. I don't deserve. No, I interrupted. You don't deserve it, but I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this for me, for the girl I was, and the woman I want to be. I refuse to let what you did to me turn me into someone like you. I stood up, signaling that our meeting was over. You have 6 months. After that, you're on your own. Just like I was when I walked out of that house at 18 with nothing but a bag of rescued memories and a heart full of pain. Deborah stood slowly, still trembling. At the door, she turned back one last time. Your mother would be proud of you, she said quietly. I know I have no right to say that, but she would be proud. I didn't respond. I just watched her go, closing the door softly behind her. And then, finally, after 25 years, I allowed myself to cry. Chapter 11. Healing. In the months that followed, I did something I had never done before. I started therapy. I had spent so many years running from my past, building success as a way to prove that Deborah hadn't broken me. But confronting her had shown me something I hadn't wanted to admit. I was still carrying wounds that hadn't healed. The therapist helped me work through decades of suppressed pain. We talked about my mother's death, about the loss of her belongings, about the basement, about my father's betrayal. We talked about the anger I still carried and the grief that had never been properly processed. It was hard. Harder than building a business empire, harder than surviving on the streets, harder than anything I had ever done. But slowly, I began to feel something shift inside me. The weight I had been carrying for so long started to lighten. I also did something else. I hired a private investigator to track down some of my mother's belongings. It was a long shot. Deborah had thrown them away over 30 years ago, but I had to try. Against all odds, we found some of them. A few pieces of jewelry that Deborah had actually kept and later sold to a pawn shop, now in a collector's possession. Some photographs that a neighbor had rescued from the trash, kept all these years in a box in their attic. A letter from my grandmother to my mother, somehow preserved by a distant relative. It wasn't everything. It wasn't even close to everything, but it was something. It was proof that my mother had existed, that she had been loved, that her memory couldn't be completely erased. I created a small shrine in my apartment, a corner dedicated to her memory. The rescued photos in frames, the jewelry in a beautiful glass case, the letter carefully preserved. Every morning, I light a candle there and take a moment to remember her. Chapter 12. Moving forward. Deborah moved out after 5 months. She found a spot in a low-income senior housing complex across town. I never heard from her again, and I never sought her out. I don't know if she ever truly understood the damage she had done, or if her tears that day in my office were genuine remorse or just fear. I don't know if she spent her remaining years reflecting on her cruelty, or if she simply moved on, unchanged. And honestly, I don't need to know. Her story is no longer part of mine. I'm 53 now. My property management company has grown into one of the most respected firms in the state. I've been able to give back to the community in ways that would have been impossible for that terrified girl in the basement to imagine. Scholarships for foster youth, donations to domestic violence shelters, funding for affordable housing initiatives. I never married, never had children of my own, Sometimes I wonder if the damage from my childhood ran too deep for that kind of intimacy, but I don't feel incomplete. I have friends who are like family, nieces and nephews from those friends who I spoil shamelessly, and a sense of peace that took decades to achieve. Every year on my mother's birthday, I visit her grave with fresh flowers. I sit there for hours, telling her about my life, about my successes and my struggles, about the woman I've become. I like to think she can hear me. I like to think she's proud. Conclusion: if you've made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. I know it's long and I know it's heavy. But I wanted to share it because I know there are others out there who have been through similar experiences. Maybe not exactly the same, but similar enough. Others who have been made to feel worthless by the people who were supposed to protect them. Others who have lost precious memories to carelessness or cruelty. Others who are still in their own basements, waiting for the day they can escape. To those people, I want to say this: you will get through this. It won't be easy, and it won't be quick, but you will survive. And one day, you will thrive. Don't let the people who hurt you define who you become. Don't let their cruelty turn you into someone like them. Hold on to the love you were given, however briefly. Let it be the light that guides you through the darkness. And remember, the universe has a way of balancing things out. Maybe it takes years, maybe it takes decades, but eventually, the people who hurt you will face their own reckonings. They'll grow old and alone, haunted by the bridges they burned, while you build a life that is beautiful and full and entirely your own. That's not revenge. That's not karma. That's just life. As for me, I'm still healing. I probably will be for the rest of my life. But every day, I get a little stronger. Every day, the basement feels a little further away. And every day, I feel my mother's love a little more clearly, carried with me just like she promised, impossible for anyone to take away. My name is Alina. I am 43 years old. And I am finally, truly free.